The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today for Thursday, October 17th, 2019. I'm Kevin Laramee, joined by Duane Rollins. As always, joining us today from The Athletic, Sam Stejskal, who has a great article now on Bruce Arena available on The Athletic. We're going to talk about it later, but first of all, Sam, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, guys. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
We're doing well, Sam. A little bit better than most American listeners here today, probably because we're in Canada and we're here to talk about the Canadian-U.S. game from Tuesday night. I read this morning, I've listened to a lot of American reaction to this, and obviously and understandably there's a lot of anger associated with this program, stemming back from 2 years ago when they failed to qualify for the World Cup, of course. My question, having listened to a lot of reaction, is how much of this is a failing of Greg Berhalter and his system, and how much of this is just the talent's not there? Because I still get a perception, a feeling that a lot of Americans believe their talent is higher than what I, as an outsider, see it as. Do you think that that's the problem, or am I wrong?
No, I think it's both. I think I've been beating this drum for a while now. I think I wrote before the Gold Cup started that this is, in my opinion, one of the weaker American pools in, the modern era of the U.S. national team. And so the talent really isn't there. There's a lot of competent players. There's not a lot of high-end players. The coaching aspect of it, the tactics, at least in my opinion, don't fit the player pool. I feel like I've heard this a million times over the last month or so, but it's square pegs and trying to fit them into round holes. So I think those things go hand in hand. And I think there are a lot of factors at play here. For me, the biggest thing on Tuesday night was just and the U.S. talked about this after the game, was just the difference in intensity and desire between Canada and the U.S. The tactics weren't great. I thought Herdman got his tactics exactly right. The U.S. didn't play well technically, right? They were sloppy with their first touches. They weren't passing well. All of that stuff is true. It made a difference. But I thought the biggest difference was just, Canada wanted that game really bad. And the U.S. looked like they were just kind of out for a training session. And that, to me, is baffling. I get that the game meant more to Canada from a potential qualifying perspective. So I was expecting a little bit of a difference in intensity, but for it to be as wide as it was, I thought was shocking.
No, fair enough. And I could go on for hours about how ridiculous the CONCACAF format is, that it creates an imbalance like this in terms of the meaning. But let's go back to Berhalter and the coaching. When I see him and what I've watched him for a while, and when I was doing hits to preview this game, I was pretty convinced that Canada was going to try and emulate what Mexico did and try and pressure the U.S. and to get on the front foot. And a lot of people sort of push back against that, suggesting that no, Berhalter he'll adjust to that. Canada's not as talented defensively. They're going to, hit over that pressure and try and get out in the wings. But yet he remained pretty steadfast in his approach to the game, Berhalter, that is, in terms of his, sort of trust the process stuff and work the system to death. Do you see any possibility that he will become more pragmatic soon now that this result has gone against him?
It's hard to say. On the one hand, I think he has to. Greg Berhalter's not a stupid man. He's an intelligent guy. He sees the same thing that everyone else is seeing in terms of what's happening on the field. How he's processing that is a little bit different. And I think his whole idea is that this is like the investment or the growth phase, right? And you're going to take some losses and you're going to take some bad performances now with the idea that these players are going to improve and they're going to get better, moving the ball side to side and dominating through possession and pulling defenses apart and then finding the gaps and exploiting the space. And that'll pay off in the long run. For me, I don't see it. I don't think the players have that in them. And I think the players are actually very well suited to kind of playing similar to how Canada did the other night. A pretty high pressing style, one where they look to get vertical quickly. So I would like to see the U.S. go to that. And there's, the very contrarian school of thought, I think, at this point, is that it's okay to be in that growth phase. And if the U.S. is ever going to meaningfully get better, then they need to embrace that style. I disagree with it. So, I don't know. Like, is he going to change? I would think so, but he seems steadfast. Are there signs? Not really, but this is one of those things where, you're kind of driving along, going one way, and then all of a sudden you go off the cliff, right? There aren't really signs. It's a binary. It's yes or no. So we'll see. I mean, if the results don't get better, there's going to be some serious pressure on Berhalter from the public, at least. I don't know about from inside the federation. And so if they don't get better and he doesn't adjust, I don't know if you can continue justifying keeping him on with qualifying coming up next year.
I was looking at Ernie Stewart, Sam, the press conference after the game at the Greg Berhalter press conference, and with a very serious look on his face, looking and listening to Greg Berhalter after the game for Ernie Stewart, and I was wondering, I'm like, okay, it's the beginning of the Berhalter era, but because of the 18 months it took to name him, he's starting with one strike already, having 2 years of negativity already as a burden for this program. What is needed to shake off that burden to give Berhalter either a true chance or someone else a chance?
Well, I think Greg is getting a true chance. Any coach that was going to walk into this was going to have to deal sort of with the emotional PTSD of not qualifying for the World Cup, right? That's going to loom over everything for the U.S. until they qualify or don't qualify for 2022. So any coach was going to have to deal with that. But I think the big thing here is who's holding Greg Berhalter accountable. The guy that runs the federation effectively is Jay Berhalter, Greg's brother. And Jay is Ernie's boss. Is Ernie going to fire Greg when Jay is his boss? Does Ernie really have that juice to pull that off? I'm not really sure. And this goes to a much deeper discussion of the problems within the U.S. Soccer Federation and kind of the lack of accountability that's been there historically, the lack of new voices, and now the, frankly, very obvious and somewhat flagrant conflicts of interests when you have two of the most important people on the men's side of the federation being brothers. And that to me is crazy. The whole interview process was a little bit, I hesitate to use the word sham, but they basically only interviewed Berhalter and Oscar Pareja. And from what I understand, the Pareja interview wasn't that serious. Tata Martino was interested in this job. Jesse Marsh was, how do you not call him? So it's that goes to the deeper thing within U.S. soccer, and I'm not sure how either Berhalter really is going to be held accountable.
It reminds me a lot of another situation, another sport, and I'm sorry to make a hockey reference with Canada in it, but Canada has won in hockey despite of themselves for a long time, just because of the high talent that the country produces in hockey. Even if the system is not made to produce talent, there'll be outliers. And I'm wondering if players like Josie Altidore and a couple others that were not there on Tuesday night because of injuries, I'm wondering if they don't hide some of the deficiencies of the system. And when you have your outliers, so your very high talent out of the squad, it shows the deficiencies of the system as a whole. Am I mistaken by saying that maybe over the last decade, when the U.S. did have some success, it was despite their lack of producing of great players?
I think sort of. We talk a lot in American soccer, and you guys are probably familiar with the phrase about the lost generation of American soccer players. And there's basically a 10-year gap almost. Maybe not quite 10 years, where for whatever reason, the U.S. was not producing and did not produce high-level national team players. They just didn't. A good example of it is there's basically the only striker to play meaningful minutes for the national team for the most part that was born between Josie Altidore, who's just about 30, and Josh Sargent, who's 19, is Gyasi Zardes. That's a huge gap, right? And Gyasi Zardes isn't exactly tearing things up on the international stage. So that's a huge problem, and that's reflected across every position for the most part in U.S. soccer. So, were those deficiencies papered over? Yeah, I think a little bit. I think they were harder to see, right, when the U.S. was having some success, say in like 2014 or even 2016 in the Copa America Centenario when they had a pretty good run. Because that previous generation, the one that ended sort of with Josie, but included guys like Michael Bradley and Jeff Cameron and Clint Dempsey, Landon Donovan, etc. They were still performing well enough to kind of have that success. And then it was sort of all exposed and laid bare with the failure to qualify in 2018 and what's happened since, where you sort of have this vacuum. You have some younger players who are talented, but maybe not that talented or maybe not ready. And then you have some older guys who, are kind of on the back end of things from the international level. And then you have players in between who, frankly, just aren't good enough. And that's kind of what we saw on Tuesday night. That mix isn't working, and something needs to change. Whether that's the development system, I'm not really sure, but there are big problems within U.S. soccer. I don't know how to solve them. They're very multi-layered, multifaceted. But I think the biggest thing is we need to have an honest assessment and an honest, open look at things and say, hey, we have big problems. We need to admit that we have big problems. And that's the first step to solving them. And I don't even feel like we're all the way there yet as a country down here in the States.
Well, speaking of those honest conversations, there is a significant, I still put it in a minority right now, but a significant minority of people out there that put a lot of the blame in the U.S.'s failings on Major League Soccer. It's been held up that Major League Soccer is helping the Panamas, Costa Ricas, and Canadas of the region more than it's helping the United States. Is there merit to that position?
I think so. I think that it is helping the other CONCACAF countries more than it's helping the U.S., but I think that's mostly to do with where those other countries were starting relative to the U.S., right? Those other countries had more room to grow. So I think it's natural that they've grown at a more rapid pace than the U.S. I don't think that MLS is necessarily a hindrance to the U.S. national team as a whole. I think it's the whole American soccer ecosystem. I think anyone knows that in order to develop to your full potential, you need to leave and you need to go to Europe, right? You need to go test yourself at the highest level. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But Canada played quite a few MLS guys the other night, and they didn't seem to have any trouble, right? Samuel Piette did fine. Liam Fraser did fine. Jonathan Osorio did fine. Richie Larea, on and on, right? Those guys played just fine. So I don't think it's a situation where just because a player is playing in MLS, he can't have some success at the international level. Is he going to be a world-class player if he remains in MLS for his entire career? Chances are unlikely, right? But to say that MLS prevents the national team from beating Canada is ridiculous. To say that you need if your guys aren't leaving MLS, that will prevent you from competing with Germany or England or France. Yeah, there's some merit there. But to say it's preventing the U.S. from beating Canada is false.
Sam Stejskal of The Athletic, thank you very much for your time today, Sam. You can follow Sam's work on The Athletic, theathletic.com, a subscription worth your while just for Sam's work. Sam, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me on, guys. Appreciate the kind words, Kevin. Have a good one.
Thank you, and we'll be right back after this short break.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
Today we're talking about the American side of the CONCACAF Nations League game that happened Tuesday night at BMO Field. If you want to hear more about the Canadian side, make sure you listen to yesterday's Soccer Today or go to our Patreon feed at patreon.com/Sports Podcasting Network, and you'll find a post-game show with audio from Jonathan David, Alfonso Davies, Lucas Cavallini, Kamal Miller, and also Peter Montopoli, General Secretary of Canada Soccer, and you can find that and more at patreon.com/Sports Podcasting Network. Duane, we're back here talking about the U.S. and the reaction from the U.S. side after the loss to Canada. I have to give you a little hint. Before the game, there was a lot of American journalists present that were very nervous, or more, I would say, apprehensive for this game. I guess the loss of Josie Altidore is enough to show us, at least show the world, that this program is not as deep as we thought it was over the years. And you take a big piece, no pun intended, like Josie Altidore out of the lineup, and it will show the deficiencies. It will stop hiding those deficiencies. Same thing could be said for Canada. If you take David and Davies out, you have to, exactly, it changes the whole depth. And I think on Tuesday night, it was one of the, I would say, ingredients on the U.S. side that showed the rest of the world that the U.S. process to get better is just beginning.
Yeah, well, one thing I've heard a lot of that I do think has some merit is that the U.S. is producing a lot more average professionals than they did 20 years ago, but they are not producing a lot of high-end professionals anymore. And if you lose one of them, that, you know, you can argue Josie's high-end or not, but in terms of in CONCACAF, he certainly would be. If you lose one of those players from your roster and you're replacing him with, well, replacement level, basically, to use a stats term, you're really not that far ahead. You know, they don't have a Landon Donovan anymore. They don't have Dempsey anymore. They don't have, you know, McBride in his pride anymore. They've got a lot of decent guys that really do need to bring the intensity and play with the type of fight that we saw Canada play with on Tuesday night if they're going to compete. And that's particularly the case in a game like Tuesday night, where it's desperation time for one team, and you need to match that. And I can give them a little bit of a pass on that, because it really was always going to be a challenge that way to motivate themselves at the same level as, you know, not only does Canada need the points, but it's also little brother trying to get one up on big brother in a way. And I say that as a Canadian, so, you know, don't get angry at me for putting it in those terms.
We're allowed. It's like I wrote the exact same analogy. I wrote the little brothers from the north. Like, I am one of those brothers. I'm allowed to say it.
Yeah, precisely. Like, we punched them in the lip and made them bleed for the first time in a while, and they're going to be confused by that. But
no,
to bring it,
Duane, they're going to say like Thanos in the movie, like, all that for just one drop of blood. Be like, yeah, it took us generations to be able to land that blow, but we'll take it.
Yeah, but there's also, you know, there's a disconnect in terms of they believe their own hype a little bit when you're reading a lot of the analysis here. In the U.S., this is just part of their culture. They believe in themselves, and I find that a good thing too. This is not an insult, but sometimes you need to take a step back and have more of a critical evaluation of your overall talent level before you burn everything down again. Now, this is not to say, we'll talk about Berhalter in a minute, and I have questions about him too, but if you look at the overall talent level objectively, they're not that much better than Canada. They might be a little deeper than Canada overall in the pool, but when you put those 11v11 out there, I don't know. Like, here, I'm going to read a quote from an article in Deadspin this morning, which is, you know, it's Deadspin, so take that with a grain of salt. But this is how they perceive their talent level. A team with Christian Pulisic, Weston McKennie, Josh Sargent, and Jordan Morris should be enough to dispose of the damn Canadians. Jordan Morris. What?
I guess.
Come on, folks. He wouldn't start for Canada. He wouldn't. Who's he going? He's taking David or Davis off. Ooh, tell me. Come on, guys. Like, that's they think of their players at a higher level than maybe they are, and that's kind of my point.
So we're over. I would say over. What's the word here? Not analyze, but we put on the pedestal MLS product. Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe that's what the where MLS is not necessarily helping American soccer is it does create players, but at the point where you mentioned not the high level enough, and when we think they're a high level enough internationally, they're not. But also, you don't build a team with 11 guys from a high level. You build a team from the middle up too. You have to be a team, and this is the beginning of that process for the U.S. men's national team and Greg Berhalter. This core player is not a core player yet. It's still I would say, players trying to fit together. Sam mentioned square pegs and round holes, or round holes and square pegs, whatever you want to do. Maybe, you know, got to give some love to the triangle peg. No one never talks about the triangle peg. They always talk about the round peg and the square peg. Triangle peg is there too, okay? So maybe they're trying to put the triangle peg into the round peg and it's not working. But, you know, I was thinking you have to give him a shot, and because of the 2 years of bad result, TNT loss, no World Cup, and then no manager, no progression, you had, of course, the interim manager, but it's not the same. You don't have the same progression, and Berhalter comes in and everyone's already angry that this program is not progressing. And just at the beginning, he's trying to get things started, and after one loss, okay, granted it's to Canada, but you have to be realistic here. the U.S. are not Mexico. The U.S. are not Brazil. The U.S. are not, heck, France. Even Germany lost a bunch of games. The Netherlands did not even make the last Euros. It's not as easy. There's more parity. And I guess, realistically, it has to be taken into the consideration. And I think that's one of the reasons why Berhalter is getting flack. Because he was realistic in the press conference after the game, saying, Canada's better than you thought they are. And the world is better than you think it is. Open your eyes. Maybe he sees it the way we do.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a big difference in terms of the last 20 years in terms of Liam Fraser. That's the obvious example of a player that's not even starting regularly in MLS, comes in, plays a system, plays a role, plays a major contribution in the win with the hockey assist on the winning goal, the ball in to create the cross, which created the goal. So this is an example of how the overall talent level for the smaller countries has risen to the point that if they have one or two sprinklings of magic in their roster, they can step up and really compete with the top end. And that's why I come back to the fact that the U.S., so they have a lot of guys that are really, really good in an MLS setting, can play in the Bundesliga they're decent players. They're quality players for sure. But they don't right now have a lot of the magic that can bring the level of those players up. And if they don't have the intensity, they don't match the intensity like we saw on Tuesday night, then they're not going to compete. And look, here's the other part too. Everyone's talking about the intensity and Canada getting stuck in and wanting it more and all that. That's true. And it played a major role in this. But the other difference in the night was that Canada had Alphonso Davies out there. Christian Pulisic was a non-factor in the game. Maybe that's because it's sick. Maybe it's not because he's not playing. But you need him if you're the U.S. You need that star player, that magic in your roster to bring the rest of the level up. Because if they don't have that, they're not going to be able to bring themselves out when they're not playing at their best. If Pulisic was where he's been hyped to be, maybe he pulls something out of his elbow on the night and gets a goal down, and then Canada gets discouraged because even though they're playing well, they're down a goal. And that can happen when you have those star players, and the U.S. just isn't producing them. And that's, I think, why there's so much consternation on terms of Pulisic not playing at Chelsea right now. Wow. There's so much concern about that, so much reaction to that. It's because I think most people deep down know that they need him playing at that top level if they're going to sort of rise up and not be in a fight for their lives to make a World Cup. Because right now, if you're putting the top 6 teams ranked in the hex right now and you're looking at it objectively, the U.S. is in that 4-3 kind of fight, right?
Well, they're not Mexico, and they might not be Costa Rica, so yeah.
Yeah, so it's a tough one. Like if they're in a semifinal stage, I think they get through it, but they're going to have to fight to get through the previous format. They're lucky they've been handed their way in.
That's true. But also, I think it's interesting to think about this, too, because you're looking at how the U.S. have played, the Berhalter tactics, how they're trying to move away from that high press and try to play a way that Berhalter believes will be the right one. But if you look at Sam's article, Sam Stejskal, who was talking to us earlier in the show, you can find his article on The Athletic, talking to Bruce Arena. And Bruce Arena already throwing shade at Greg Berhalter, saying they're managing this like a club, but it's not a club, it's a country. First of all, give him time. Second of all, though, is he right? Is there something there? Is there something about the management style of a Greg Berhalter and his staff already for the U.S. men's national team that does not create an environment that you can say would be good to help this team grow in the future? So maybe the tactics are wrong too. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I'm normally very conservative when it comes to calling for managers' heads. First off, you're talking about a human being in a job, so I don't like to do that. Yes. But just from a standpoint of his performance right now, I normally would agree with you that it is way too soon. But when I looked at how, I hesitate to use the word zealot in terms of his tactics, but there is a zealousy to it. Zealousy, is that the word? Anyway, there is an obsession with the stubbornness. With the process. Yeah, let's go with that. There is like an obsession, a single-mindedness to the tactics that he's choosing to use, that the trust the process. It's one of the worst and most used phrases in sports right now is trust the process, and that's kind of what Greg Berhalter is doing. He said, don't worry about it if things are looking terrible right now, but they're going to be better in the future. Well, that's easy to say. I will go this far. If he in the November game against Canada, Canada went out, played the style that they played the tactics he played with sort of the box midfield, jamming up the middle, leaving out the wings. U.S. didn't adjust during the game. If I'm John Herdman, I go down to Orlando, play the exact same way. Because there is no inclination, there's no evidence that Greg Berhalter is going to change his tactics. And if he goes into that game in Orlando and does not change his tactics, then there's a very good chance that the result might be the same. It may be the best to draw because the U.S. showed nothing on the night. There's so much negativity and toxicity around the program that it's difficult to see that there's going to be any home advantage at all for them in that game. If anything, the crowd's going to be not on Canada's side, but so viciously angry at the U.S. that it might be toxic and might make it more difficult for them. So don't expect any boost from playing in Orlando versus Toronto. And if he doesn't adjust, if the same thing happens in a month, then I'm full on with the American fans at that point. They need to get rid of him because he is showing a incredible level of inflexibility and lack of
accountability, I would say.
Reasonableness, like of observation.
And also,
he does the same thing.
I think it has to be mentioned, and Sam did mention it earlier today, and I heard it from other sources before too. The fact that his brother is in the hierarchy of U.S. soccer above him and above his boss does make it a bit, it's a conflict of interest. And it does make it a bit kind of weird if something has to happen. And the fact that it took 18 months before the announcement and the nomination of the manager does give Berhalter maybe a unfair pressure to create result quickly. But it's not like he was coming into this job with a resume big enough to give him years and years of leeway. It's not a Mourinho. It's not a Hector Herrera, I would say, from Club America example. It's not a coach to that level. It's a coach that had some good success, but it had some bad success, like example in 2013 in Europe in Harvardy, where he was fired for not playing an offensive enough type of football. Could life happen again? Could lightning strike twice? Could Greg Berhalter lose his job in the next few months because the U.S. do not play offensive enough?
There is a legitimate question that American fans will have about the conflict of interest. That is 100% sure. I tend to be a little bit more open-minded to the idea that people are capable of making rational decisions, even if they have a personal connection to the people they're making it about. I tend to believe that. I believe that it's not everything in the world's a conspiracy. But that said, I do see optically why this is a problem and why it would be a little more challenging for sure to let him go if the results don't go their way. Look, if Greg Berhalter loses his job, it's because he is not learning from what is happening, and Bruce Arena it's because Bruce Arena is correct, and he's treating it like a club team when it's not the way to go about this. And I think Greg Berhalter would land on his feet in Major League Soccer again pretty quickly because he is a decent MLS coach, although not exceptional. His record doesn't show it. Columbus had one good year under him, really. So it's not really obvious, other than he is viewed as very intelligent and very tactically minded, and anyone who's played under him, if you listen to players who have played under him talk, they talk in glowing terms about his understanding of the tactics of the game. That's great, but it's also not management in its entirety, right? I feel like the anti-stats people, when I say that, it's like, sometimes there's something there, like reactions and instinct that might be missing with him that's not totally explained by X's and O's. Just as, you can't just look at a spreadsheet and understand the game. It's kind of a similar sort of two sides of the same thing, right? And I was going into the Canada game. I thought anyone who was calling for him to be fired right away was a little bit nuts, to be blunt, but then I saw it firsthand in front of me and saw the lack of adjustment to a game plan that clearly was not working in the first half for the U.S. In fact, they were lucky not to be down 3 goals at half.
That's true.
That when he didn't make any adjustments, in fact, the second half was more of the same. It's like you start to go, and there's a pattern here. He's like completely single-minded, like he's got blinders on, and he's not willing to make any adjustments. Now, look, the other side of this is that if it is a process, and if the U.S. is bought in completely to his long-term vision, that a little bit of pain in 2019 will result into a lot of pleasure in 2022, that's then you've got a full-on commit. But they should be honest about that. They should come out and say that we're not ready to compete. We're going to lose some games. We're probably at the level of a Canada right now. Not like, oh my God, we can't believe we lost to them. It's like, that's our level right now because we're trying to learn this system and we're going to lose some games to teams that we've never lost to before in that process. You can't really say that out loud in this modern world because they get tortured for it. And
you'll lose your job for a lack of confidence, right? So no, it's a fascinating aspect. We're not going to fix it today and we're not going to know the solution or anything today. But it's something we need to keep an eye on. And because with our program too, with the Canadian Men's National Team program, right now it's going well with John Herdman. We have the results, but in the future, we'll see if the growth continues and if John Herdman will be the man to continue the growth over the next corner that the team turns. And it's all about progression. And in this world, not just in sports, but in this world, if you're staying still, you're actually not staying still. You're going backwards.
Absolutely. Look, it's a tough gig. It's one of the hardest jobs in the world, I would say, because you have a very large and passionate fan base that is in some cases very educated and in other cases not remotely educated. And you have a system that is unwieldy, that is difficult to do proper talent evaluation because it's so big, so vast, so many people pulling in different ways. It's a very difficult job. And it's a job that is a unique position in world football, I would say. So I don't envy them, but at the same time, yes, the U.S. should be better than they are right now, and yes, the U.S. should be having tough conversations, and they are having angry conversations right now, but I'm not sure they're having honest conversations now from having listened in. Like big brother, little brother, I have my ear to the big brother's door, and I'm listening to it all the time, and I'm not sure Big Brother is completely being honest with themselves yet. They're angry with themselves, but are they honest yet? That's my question to the American listeners out there.
I think we'll finish the show with this quote, Duane. At the end of the day, no matter how deep we look into this game and we break it down, the U.S. did not lose this game. Canada won this game.
And they did. And they got the points that they needed to move up to what we all believe sixth in the rankings. So, it's the ball's in their court now. Keep winning and they're in.
Yeah, keep winning in there. And on that note, we'll say goodbye for today. Thanks again to Sam Stejskal. You can follow his work on The Athletic. A great subscription if you like to read about sports. They also have a great podcast that just started to use all the resources they have. So The Athletic, a worthy subscription to follow the beautiful game in North America. Not in Canada, of course. There's not a lot of coverage of the Canadian game on The Athletic, but the American game is well covered. And Sam and Jeff Ruder, two of our voices that you can hear on this show from time to time, are doing great work with The Athletic. So we suggest you take a look at their work. You can find us on Twitter at Kev Laramee for me, at 24th Minute for Duane, and at Soccer Today SPN for this show. And you can find the podcast version of all the shows we do at sportspodcastingnetwork.com and anywhere you get your podcasts. But as always, until tomorrow, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramee. We wish you a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.